Thank you for tuning in to my official YouTube channel, Reverend MeeLing. I'm Reverend MeeLing. I've been known by a few names: Reverend MeeLing, Reverend Susan MeeLing, Lady MeeLing, Lady Dori, Belle, so on and so forth. And so I'm going to continue in part 2 of Finding the Silver Lining, where I show the pages and give a bigger context in that regard, but in a quicker way, because you can read the words as I put it up to the camera thing, and then you can listen as well after reading, or however you do that, so that way there is a better understanding and comprehension of. So I'm going to literally pick up this page and this page. So in reference to the first birthday together, in reference of my son and my daughter, when my son turned 2 years old and my daughter turned 1 year old, my ex-in-laws now, meaning Susie Marie Nichols Lopez, her 3 children, Brianna Marie, Marissa Marie, and Joseph Anthony Lopez, drove down to my house in San Antonio with Grandma Nichols, and she brought a bunch of her dogs with her, did a barbecue, cooked the birthday cake, so on and so forth. And it was genuinely a good time for the most part. There were certain aspects that I had to deal with, you know, ex-in-laws nonetheless. And so, you know, it just was one of those situations which were extremely important to me, because I was able to have my son and my daughter together. And then, you know, I got to make a bunch of food, like I do like to do. So in reference to bumper cars, my son and my daughter were very upset in certain regards, but it was one of those, well, that's part of it, you know, so have fun. Not on the road, but actual bumper cars, you know, at like an arcade sort of setup. I think it was Peter Piper Pizza that had that. And, you know, it took them a while to get used to it, and then they had fun. But yeah, it was in regards to in that area. Or was it Chuck E. Cheese, or both of them? Nonetheless, having that fun. In reference to PB, I had to explain what a psycho bitch is. Which I know there are plenty of people who know what a psychotic ex is like. Maybe not to the certain level as far as like how my dead ex-husband when he was alive, although there are some that could relate to that. Very much so. And, you know, I guess I should have expanded that when explaining to my son that that could include, like, in reference to ex-in-laws, certain aspects in that regard. And while when discussing with my son in reference to the aspects of, realistically at that time, I was actually discussing females. I didn't think about, you know, the way certain males could be, for example, like Cactus Jack, also known as Jeffrey Kirkendall Jr., or Patrick Kennedy, and that whole thing. I just kind of, you know, didn't really think about that. Despite the one particular aspect of my now dead ex-husband, it was just one of those, well, you know. I did give the example, though. However, that sort of stuff I personally don't understand. I know that it occurs. I just am not one of those individuals. When it comes to, you know, a relationship that's over, it's one of those, I can genuinely be a friend. I don't mean that in a backhanded way. I don't mean that in a, oh, maybe string along. No. I can genuinely do that. I just didn't realize I might be one of the few who can actually do that. I genuinely, you know, have been that way. I mean, even before my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000, there were those that I remained friends with. At least I thought. I didn't view it in another way in that regard. It was just one of those, okay, if, you know, the relationship is over, still see one another in person, you know. I didn't throw a fit when they were dating other people. I didn't do anything to try to make them jealous. I didn't talk bad about who they were with. It was just, okay, you know, life goes on. And not in a cold-hearted way, just one of those, you know, if I'm meant to, like, be involved in that sort of way, then I'm meant to be involved in that sort of way. However, I'm not going to force that. You either want to be with me or you don't. And if you don't want to be with me, then just tell me you don't want to be with me, and I won't bother you. I don't do well with hints. And so if that is the preference, then that's the preference. However, if, you know, that passive-aggressive garbage, I don't have patience for that, and that will make my anger and fury go. Because it's just one of those, you want to do what, and then you don't have the actual capability to verbalize that. I mean, realistically. Just one of those, because I've seen other people do that, and it's one of those, I don't understand that. That doesn't make any sense. But again, I'm also not the type of person who does that. I will tell you one way or another. I don't have patience for that other sort of garbage. And so, you know, it's one of those, if that is your preference, then, you know, we are adults, right? We're biologically over the age, then be an adult. And granted, that was before my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000 that I had that view, but that definitely did not change after my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. And stuff like that makes me think, well, then you don't technically have the right to call yourself an adult when you're acting like a child. Because the only individuals I have seen that have acted like that are actual children. I never thought that adults would act like that. Then again, I've also had different views in quite a few different ways. So when I have told people I can still be friends, I can. And it's not in a false way. It's not in a way to cause additional problems. It genuinely is being truthfully friendly. I don't do well with immaturity at all, especially when it comes from adults. I don't deal well with that. That will get my anger and fury going in so many ways that, you know, you can make jokes about the ocean in that regard as to the fury and rage that would occur. And so I will just leave that at that. And so go on to the next aspect in that regard, you know. So in reference to Alabama, I discussed in reference to, or wrote about the aspects of after the Vandenberg scuba dive, how I was essentially guilted to going to take my son, my daughter, and my niece to Alabama to see their great-grandmother, when that could have occurred when in Georgia instead. However, in that regard, it's just one of those, well, Mary Evangelina Nichols Osteen could have just had that actually occur when in Georgia. However, whatever her excuses were is what her excuses were. And so I received calls from all three of my ex-in-laws in regards of my two ex-sisters-in-law and my ex-brother-in-law. And, oh, well, you know, yeah, could have done that before. Could have, instead. And I told all three of them about my scuba dive in reference to the Vandenberg. And instead of, again, anybody caring and actually checking on me, you know, in person, not some backhanded, childish, immature way of doing things, and genuinely asking, instead, I just had to deal with it on my own. So that is what it is. You know, that is what it is. And so there's that and that. In regards of Dakota, my biological mother's favorite dog, that dog attacked my children. My son was a year old. My daughter was 3 months old. Made my children's feet bleed after so many warnings. That dog went airborne. Literally. In regards to the inflatable one, whatchamacallit, that was the, aspect of, Pump It Up, and how, my now dead ex-husband, then just ex-husband, had got mad because I had cared more about my daughter after the female teenager had turned off the switch and the inflatable thing landed on my daughter and knocked her off of the chair. And so there's that I've discussed in prior aspects. In reference to the sex education, my daughter had asked questions in reference to certain things, similarly, not the exact same way, but just had asked what a condom was. And so I went and got a condom from my room, showed my son and my daughter how to put one on using my fingers, so that way they could see that. We were on the back patio and discussed it, and it was one of those, you know, it's better to use protection to make sure that there is the understanding. They were, that was 2012, and so my daughter was 10 years old, my son was 11, and I had explained that because I knew that there were videos that, you know, they might have seen, like, in reference to their friends, in school stuff, in regards of my son was already taking health classes in that regard. And so I was explaining that so that way they knew ways to protect against STDs while also keeping that understanding so that way they could protect themselves when adults. And I had explained the aspects of I prefer in regards to a committed relationship. You are too young in that regard in certain aspects, and had explained the aspects of birth control as well as spermicidal lubricant, and that where it was just a very factual aspect. Later in Vancouver, Washington, my now ex-boyfriend had talked about what his dad had done, and he had basically taken a banana, put a condom on it, showing his son that, because every parent at some point has the discussion of birds and bees with their children. So when James had discussed that discussion that he remembered as far as his sister and him, when I had explained things, my now ex-boyfriend said, well, that's nothing to worry about. At least it wasn't like what his friend went through, which was his dad put a condom on a banana, said, you want to use it like this. Otherwise, if you get a female knocked up, he ripped the condom off and bit the banana with the peel on it and said, that's what's going to happen. And I looked at my now ex-boyfriend and I was just like, well, there you go. That is definitely a different way. See, I am so much nicer than some people, despite what some people want to think. See that the way I explain that to you in a very factual way is much nicer, right? My son looked at me and goes, yeah, I'm so glad that was the way you taught me instead. I'm so glad. Thank you. I was like, no problem. I love you. And so, it's one of those, it is what it is in that regard, making sure that there is the understanding. So, going on to the repeat question, well, that goes into the aspects of the, I don't know if I had shown that aspect yet, the aspects of the pregnancy for each of them. My son and my daughter constantly asked about when I was pregnant with each of them, compared their aspects, and asked me what I went through. And so I was like, well, this and this and this. And so, I had explained I love my son and my daughter so much that, despite the fact that I had gained as much weight as I did, and despite the fact that each of them were late for, the expected delivery date by 2 weeks, each one of them, and despite the fact that I had my membrane stripped so that way I could have labor induced, and despite the fact of both of them having gone home for each one to then go back to the hospital to then get medications to get me to sleep because of how I had not dilated at all, multiple times for both of them, multiple days in between, and then several days afterwards, then actually being admitted to the hospital for each one of them, and then, just days of being in labor, both of them, I had to get Pitocin in my IV to actually get those contractions, and then both of them I had to get surgery to repair because each of them had ripped me in that particular area because the doctors refused to do a C-section for either one. And so each one of them was 7 days of labor each. And so I told them, that's how much I love you. I love you so much that I dealt with all of that and still care and love you and want the best for you no matter what. And I very much see how that is a very Hebrew, East Coast, especially Hebrew sort of way. This is how much I love you. I allowed this. Can you tell some of the individuals that I had discussions with? And so that is what it is, and grew up around. So the eggerito, those who have swaddled a child, when you wrap their arms in the blanket after folding it in a triangle shape and then, wrapping it like this and then tucking the blanket in, I thought that they looked like a little egg roll or a little burrito. And since, my now dead ex-husband, half Dominican, I grew up with multiple babysitters, one of the families actually being from the Dominican Republic, and then other Puerto Rican and Spanish and so on and so forth babysitters, but the main one was Dominican, and then being half Chinese, I kind of figured they looked like little egg rolls or little burritos. I mean, half each. If I actually had them at the same time, I could have put them together and then, it looked like just one big egg roll or one big burrito. I was told I was racist for saying that about my own children when they were all swaddled up like that, and I was like, I don't really think that's racist. I'm just saying what they look like, unless you're saying that food is racist now. I don't understand that because, you have Chinese food, you have Dominican food, you have Mexican food, you have Spanish food, you have Puerto Rican food, because there are certain dishes that are specifically for. And so I'm just saying, like, even back then, it's just, I don't understand how that's racist. That to me is ironically actually funny because, you know, just is. I didn't see an issue with that because, you know, they look like those who have had swaddled up babies with the way that goes. It looks like a burrito, and maybe that's just because of the way I look at things. However, that is what it is. And so I thought that that was funny. I mean, I'm not the smartest crayon in the toolbox, however. So in reference to Ricochet, when I was playing when I was asked to play Call of Duty with my son, said, okay. I was out on the back patio, and he came out. He's like, Mom, will you come play a video game with me? It's like, I haven't played video games in a really long time, but sure, sure. So this was either 2012 or 2013. It was in the San Antonio apartment. And so he gives me the controller, and he goes, and this does this, and you do this, and this, and I just look at him like, this is not Nintendo. And this is not Sega Genesis. What is this? And my son looks at me and he goes, it's, you know, it's the whether it was PlayStation or Xbox, I don't know. And just, look, and you do this, and you do this, and you do this, and it's just, can I fly an airplane with this thing? Like, what is this thing? And so I tried. I failed. I tried playing. And I first off, I got sick because I had never seen the split screens before. So my headaches instantly went to migraines. And I was like, I don't understand this. Okay, go and do that. I'm going to try. I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to fail. I'm going to try. And so we played maybe 5 minutes, if that. And then, you know, one of the things on the screen were laying down. I was like, I win! And so killed you. I killed you. I did it with the video game. I did it. And my son looks at me and goes, I love you. I win. And he looks, I love you, Mom. What'd I do? I win. You proud of me for winning? I love you, Mom. I don't think that... what does that mean? So then he gives me a hug, and he tells me, Mom, you never have to play another video game ever again. I only played one video game since after my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. I won. And he, no, Mom. But you taught me a lesson. That I won? No, you taught me that in the video game of Call of Duty, whichever one it was, you can die from a ricochet. And at that point, I looked at him and said, actually, in real life, if you actually, like, I don't know about, like, video games and how they've progressed, but in real life, that actually can occur. And so it's actually a thing that can occur if you don't know how to aim correctly. And there are these different things that can occur that if it hits metal, it can ricochet off and bounce and do this, that, and the other. And then he looks at me and goes, that's fantastic that you actually went to explain that to me. I was just referring to the video game. I look at him and I'm like, well, you know, the video game Call of Duty thing is that. And in real life, that actually does occur. So I know you're looking at doing certain things in reference to the military. So I want you to understand that despite the video game thing and what goes on there, I want you to understand that in real life that can actually occur. I don't want you to find out to understand. However, you know, with your Call of Duty video game, I want you to understand that in real life that can occur. And we talked for a little while, and he's like, you still don't ever have to play another video game again. I love you, Mom. Gave me a big hug. I love you too. Why don't you go outside? Okay. Go outside. Fine. Go. Love you. Yeah, I love you too. Fine. So yeah, that was the first and last time I ever played a video game. After my head injury on Palm Sunday of 2000. Shortly, it was either like 1 or 2 weeks before or 1 or 2 weeks after that, with the aspects of Brandon going over to my apartment and us sitting outside and smoking and talking, and then my son asking about certain things, and then a message that I received from my ex, Patrick Kennedy, and I didn't understand that. So then, in reference to, yeah, my dog, Ganesh. Oh, I already discussed in the last one of how he was absolutely afraid of flutterby. Well, specifically sparrows is what I brought up. However, yeah, no. His fear of little itty bitty things was because of a flutterby. He was running in the backyard with Nick and Princess. He went and shook his head, stepped on one ear, rolled, and when he got up, it's a little flutterby. And it landed on his nose, and that high-pitched squeal as his tail just tapped the center of his chest. And it's like, I'm sitting on the patio, and I look out in my yard, and he is just, and he's curled up in the fetal position, his tail is tapping his chest, and I'm just watching this and trying not to laugh at that time. Because I saw how big his paws were, and it's like, you are going to be huge. Huge! And you're going to just be scared of flutterbys. And he was. After that, it didn't matter what size the flutterby was. And run over to me, jump in my lap, and because he would run at such a great speed, he'd jump in my lap, my chair would be pushed back as I sat there. It's like, yes, you're a big baby. Yes, that me no flutterby got you. Yes, you did. You scared of the flutterby. And he'd, have his head buried in my chest, and it's like, yes, I know that big old flutterby got you. Yes, I know. Oh, you're such a good dog. You're so special. You really are. And it's like, oh, you are just gonna be so big. And then, I move one of his paws, and his paws were like that big. It's like, to be the biggest baby ever. And then when he was 200 pounds, I could actually hold him like a baby. I actually could hold him in my arms like a baby. And just, yeah, you are not kidding me? And my son and my daughter thought that was hilarious. Oh, they thought it was hilarious because, he's a 200-pound Great Dane. And if the flutterby came in the yard, he'd come running over to jump in my lap. Didn't matter what size he was. Yes, I know. and it didn't matter. It really didn't. He was constantly scared. I was like, okay. Yup, a little flutterby. Yes, I know. My son and my daughter would be looking like, Ganesh is such a baby. Yes, I know he is. And then Ganesh would be, and then the three of us would laugh because it was just funny that a 200-pound Great Dane Yes, I know you, big baby. And he was not a ninja. I mean, he was, but he wasn't. So I'd be doing stuff on the computer outside, smoking my cigarette, and he would back up and then just put his hips, like where my legs were, until I moved my chair, and it's like, all right, well, I'll take a break. And so then he would put one leg up while sitting and standing with one leg down in the back and then the two in the front. It's like, oh, are you going to pretend that you are the size of a lapdog now? And then slowly he would get his second back paw up, and he'd just have his front paws on the ground just with his butt in my lap. And it's like, I wasn't doing anything, sure. Okay. And then he'd turn and he'd look at me. It's like, yes, I will scratch. Yes, you are the biggest baby. And yes. And then his thing, though, was he always wanted me to hold him like a little baby. 200 pounds. And so I, if I was doing stuff and he wanted my attention, yes, okay, yes, you're a good puppy dog, you big 200-pound titty baby. And I'd pick him up and I'd hold him because he would, that's just how he was. So if he wanted my attention in certain ways, because, a big old scary flutterby or a bird or something, a grass moved and he would just, whatever. Which, of course, my son and my daughter always found funny when he would do that because, they'd watch the grass actually move, touch his foot, and and I don't mean like his paws, I mean the back of his foot, just and run over. And because he knew, because I had trained him that if, for a hug, I'd have to go like this at the same time of saying hug. So I'd have to go, hug. And then he'd put his paws on my shoulders and then just stand up. And then, like that. And I was like, yes, I see you here. You big baby. Like, yes, you are... wow, and then if that wasn't enough attention in certain regards beyond being petted and stuff like that, and it was usually when he'd back in to my lap, then if he made a certain sound, I would have to pick him up, flip him over, so that way I cradled this 200-pound Great Dane. And at one point, I had this 200-pound Great Dane in my arms. And I thought it was funny. My son and my daughter started laughing along with, because I was like, hush, little puppy, don't you cry. Poor little scary flutterby. And then he'd bury his face in my chest. And it's like, really? You understood that? Yes, I know. You 200-pound Great Dane. Why are you such a baby? Biggest baby ever. Messed up by, like, flutterbys. Scared of flutterbys. Oh, hold me like a baby. Okay. You sorry excuse for a dog. 200 pounds. Can't. Yeah, okay. Sure. Yeah, whatever. Okay. Just walk around holding a 200-pound Great Dane. Full-grown adult, of course. And yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, at one point in time, I had allowed him to get into the bed. Because usually it was you sleep on your bed on the floor. One time I was like, okay, you can lay in the bed with me. And then he tried to push me out of the bed. Get out of my bed. I don't think so. You go back to... And after that, he'd try to push me out of my bed. I don't think so. Yeah, no, that didn't work out so well for him. No, he stayed on the floor after that. No, big baby. So what else? He destroyed many of my glasses with his tail. Those who have had a Great Dane or dog similar in size, that tail, viciously painful. And so, yeah, my children learned how to real quick because they were that height to his tail. So they just learned how to block real quick. It's like, yeah, well, that kind of works out. Whatever. Don't do that. And then he'd sit, and it's like, yeah, good boy, good boy. So then, in reference to the double-edged sword, my now dead ex-husband, when he was alive, during the first separation, what he would do is say that to get my children to clean up the diapers, and this is what he had wound up confessing just before his death, essentially. He had said that he had done the hide-and-go-seek with the diaper. Oh, that pissed me off. It's like, why don't you just clean up the diapers after you change them yourselves at that point? You know, and his response was, well, you know, you said, because I did say this, he had told me, you said that if, you know, after having forced me out of my house in San Antonio during the first separation, if, you know, making that occur, you wouldn't help with cleaning up the house. You're right. That didn't mean my son and my daughter needed to do that, though. You're the adult. You should have done that. And be glad you didn't tell me that back then. I have a whole bunch of hope right now, and it's not in your favor. And so that is what it is in that regard. I don't deny that. However, in reference to teaching that, in reference to that, because I didn't know my children had remembered that, because they wound up telling me that after essentially his death. And so my daughter had told me about that. And I said, that was wrong. I'm glad that you told me about that. I wish you had told me back then, but then again, that is what it is as far as that. However, you know, that is something that you can learn from, and we discussed certain aspects of it. And both my son and my daughter talked different points of that situation at that time. It was 2009 when they had brought that up, and that was realistically my daughter's only bad memory of her biological father, whereas my son had remembered a lot more. He had remembered how I had to carry both of them up the stairs while my now dead ex-husband, their biological father, threw things at me. And he would pick up things, whatever, in the kitchen or in the hallway, and just throw it at my back because I was taking my son and my daughter up the stairs. So that way I could get them to safety, so that way they wouldn't be hurt. And so while my son didn't fully understand that at the time, it was, you know, he did remember that, and he had also, I don't know whether or not he remembered this particular portion. There were points in time where, before the first separation, because I had done what I could to keep my son and my daughter safe, whichever room that I had gotten them into to get them, you know, in their rooms to be safe, my now dead ex-husband would then come up the stairs, shut the door, and lock it. And I would be in the room with my two children doing what I could to keep them safe, which in certain regards it was safer in their rooms, but I couldn't I couldn't get out of the rooms no matter what, because he put stuff against the, I mean, I heard him slide stuff, and it was just, I had to do what I had to do. So, you know, my daughter, being younger, didn't necessarily remember that as much as my son. Obviously, in comparison to me, obviously I remembered quite a bit more in that regard. And so I had to do what I could. And there were points where it would be over the whole weekend that we would be in whichever one of their rooms, and I would do what I could to make the best of the situation, to keep them safe, and just do what I could. And so I obviously had not known certain aspects in that regard. However, I have told many people over the years that I had not seen my now dead ex-husband in 2 days from the time he was considered DOA prior. I hadn't spoken with him in 2 days. And if you ever wind up finding out what I endured, despite the aspects of what I had to do to keep my children safe, you would understand that not just because I was interrogated by CID at that time, you will understand that I don't have to say that, but I do. Because most people, when they have a dead ex, whatever, usually they don't have those certain specifics, and there were plenty of times I would guesstimate that I probably actually could have gotten away with that. It's a little late for me to think about that at this point. You know, see how it's 2020. However, my main concern at those times were my son and my daughter. And it wasn't that I didn't care about my own safety. I just had to do what I needed to do to make sure that they were safe. And so, other times, in that aspect, like if they were already down for a nap or they had already gone to sleep for the night and something got started, then it was just me defending myself. And one time I went to block that didn't turn out so well for me. I'll just leave it at that. In reference to leaving the house during the first separation, I didn't really have a choice. I take that back. I had a choice. My choice was to die or move into an apartment. Those were my choices. And so, knowing I couldn't put my son and my daughter through that, because what was I going to do? Have him raise my son of my daughter? No, that wasn't. No. And so, without me? No. And so, the point where I very much understood was my son and my daughter were in their rooms, and I told him I wanted a divorce, and there was a conversation, and when I balked back, he picked me up and he slammed my body into the wall that was next to the refrigerator. There was a mail package holder thing with a chalkboard and hooks for the keys. That was right there. It was a black chalkboard with a white frame, and I did what I could to not get injured as best as I could from that, and after some more time of that conversation in the kitchen, I accepted that I needed to get an apartment, so that way my son and my daughter could have a house, because I wanted them to grow up in a house. And so, while I was very much made fun of for that by my ex-sisters-in-law, and as I was asked, well, what type of mom, I was actually asked this, what type of mom would actually not fight to stay in the house? Well, I actually did. I actually did. And at the point where I had to make the choice, do I want to win the battle and lose the war? Because that's what it was for him. I chose to win the battle and go and get an apartment. Not that I was actually safe in that regard, because he broke into my apartment and he messed with my stuff in my apartment, and he never actually left me alone. When we were separated during the first time, until he realized that I wasn't going to put up with certain things. And then slowly it actually became discussions before the final separation, because we did get back together for a very brief amount of time. However, when it came to the final separation, it was over. And he knew I didn't want to have anything to do with him whatsoever. And he learned during that final separation, once he got his apartment, he understood we were never getting back together. And that was the end of that. And while there were plenty of individuals over the years who never understood when I tried to explain things, I was essentially told many times over, you're just overreacting. You don't know. No, I know what I went through. I know what I did to save my son and my daughter. I know that there were plenty of times that I had to crawl up the stairs to hide in the closet, to attempt to just cover myself so that way he couldn't find me, and that way he couldn't hurt me, and because he'd only be focusing on me, he would keep his self away from my son and my daughter. And so there were a few times where I had crawled into the closet and there was a blood trail. It's not like there wasn't. But I had done what I had done energetically to stay safe. And he had told a few people about how he didn't know where I went or how I got there. And it is what it is on that. And so it was a double-edged sword for me, because I know what I survived for my son and my daughter. And when putting some of the stuff into writing, it was, this is how much I care. And I fought this hard so that you could live and actually have a chance. And so where I knew individuals, like at that time, it was the Jade Wolf Coven. And Christine of the Jade Wolf Coven actually told me she was jealous of me because, you know, somebody cared that much. So that's not a way to care about someone at all. However, I will end in regards to the last two stories in that regard of this. The 4th of July, there was the aspect of the inflatable bounce house at, I think it was Lackland Air Force Base. And my son and my daughter, I had convinced them to go onto the teacups. I had a weird feeling. And then the wind kicked up while they were on the ride, and the inflatable bounce house collapsed, and I yelled out to the different soldiers that were there, or airmen that were there, and, you know, grab that, pull here, parents, let's go. Got the kids out to safety, and then, you know, just went on with the rest of the day. I was made fun of when I explained that to some people. That's why I really didn't talk about it much afterwards, because I had said that there was this weird sensation in my back, this weird tingling that just kind of, and, oh, ha ha ha, like you had a spidey sense tingling? I don't know what that means, but just dealt with it. And so I was made fun of for not knowing the reference or anything like that, and it was one of those, I'll just stop talking. Because why bother? Insert references. So, the final one is in reference to Harley Quinn, which is was a half Australian Shepherd, half Blue Heeler that my son had been given because of a place that I would go to in San Antonio. The dog could not handle what was going on in the area. And so, got the dog. My son loved that dog. Was best friend in that regard, and it helped in a lot of ways with everything that was going on. And one day he was like, you know, look, she's this, and I and I had said, she needs to stop eating that much. And my son looked at me and he goes, why? 'Cause she's fat. And he said, no, she's not. She's fluffy. And I was like, no, she's a half Australian Shepherd, half Blue Heeler. Individually, those breeds get to like 50 pounds. She's like 85, 86 pounds. she needs to like stop feeding her food that she doesn't need to eat. And so she's just fluffy. No, she just got a haircut. That is not fluffy. No, that is not fluffy. Look at those rolls. And so I pinched a few that it was like 4 inches, 5 inches of, rolls. And I look at that. And he goes, she's just fluffy. That is not fluff. I know you're half Chinese or a quarter Chinese, but nonetheless, that is not fluff. And he looked at me, he's like, what does that mean? Nothing. You didn't grow up where I grew up walking around. And you didn't get raised with a lot of influence from, my Buk Gung and Buk Poo, so you wouldn't understand that at all. Nonetheless, that is what it is. So, I will just end in that regard on that, which will be the next aspect. So, you guys have a good one. Hopefully this explains certain things a little bit better. And, at this point, whatever it's worth, I guess. Have a good one.